Welcome back to Talk the Walk with me, Sarah Wong. I'm with Hyunsu Yim, reporter at the Korea Herald. Thank you very much, Hyunyu, for joining us on Talk the Walk.
Thank you for having me.
We're just talking about, in the intro, I also mentioned that gender issues are front and center in the South Korean presidential election on March 9th. And the president-elect Yoon Suk-yeol is accused of, galvanizing votes on an anti-feminism platform. And I know that South Korea has one of the worst gender inequalities among OECD countries. Now, in the March 9th election, around 60% of Gen Z women supported the progressive candidate Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party, while 60% of their male counterparts supported Yoon. I guess I want you to help us understand the general environment in South Korea, where Yoon's advocacy for example, abolishing the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family could flourish in a way and send him into office.
As you said, younger women voted in droves for his rival, Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party of Korea, who's the liberal progressive candidate. But bear in mind, a lot of older women voted for Yoon as well. And I spoke to women of different age groups, and especially ones who voted for Yoon. And on their agenda on election day, feminism, although they do care, women's rights, they do care, it was overshadowed by other issues. For example, South Korea has a housing crisis,
right,
as well as job security issues. So women, though kind of affected by Yoon's anti-feminist rhetoric, there were many women who did vote for Yoon because they thought that current President Moon's housing policy failed and that it affected their chances of working, getting on the housing ladder. But on the other hand, there were a lot of women who were disenfranchised by Yoon's rhetoric, and at the center of the issue was to abolish the Gender Equality Ministry. And surveys after survey, it keeps showing, and there have been lots of studies, and there was the glass ceiling index by The Economist, and the gender wage gap by the OECD, that South Korea, even after all this economic development and its rise in soft power, we still trail behind a lot of other developed countries in gender equality, and that is a reality. And the concern is that despite these figures, that gender inequality still exists, and it is an actual real thing. We have an incoming president who has said that structural gender discrimination no longer exists, and that he has once kind of seemingly blamed feminism in the country's declining birth rate. So for these young women, their concern is very serious.
Do you think that some of the voters who voted for Yoon is not because that they're drawn to his rhetorics against feminism? It's mostly because of the failed social policies by Moon Jae-in's Democratic Party, and their support for Yoon is essentially a vote for change, propelled by their fatigue of the past 5 years of Moon Jae-in's presidency.
I think that is a fair picture of the current political landscape in South Korea. It isn't to say that there was a group of loyal supporters of Yoon who were excited to see him take office, but on both ends of the political spectrum, during the election, a lot of people were voting for so-called lesser evil. And Yoon won because there was a great level of frustration with what the current administration has been doing on issues such as, for example, the housing policy. And if you look at what the conservatives have been saying, there has been this frustration brewing underneath in that they thought President Moon was too soft on North Korea. And in the meantime, they felt that the alliance between the US and South Korea has been weakened, and that has been the narrative by the conservatives. They also think that Moon, in their view, dwelled too much on the past with Japan, and that essentially ended up souring South Korea's relations with Japan. So among conservatives, there is this hope that with Yoon in office, the relations with Japan and US will be back on track, and that now that Yoon will be in office, we will see more of South Korea standing up to North Korean threats, standing up to China. But I would like to add one point. Seoul, whoever wins, whoever is the president, still remains stuck in between Washington and Beijing, geographically, but also politically. So the rhetoric might be heightened with Yoon in office, but if you look at what Yoon has been doing, Yoon has also made a call with Xi Jinping, and he has talked about in a recent interview with the Washington Post how China still remains an important trade partner. He also said that even though China and South Korea don't see things politically eye to eye, China, after all, is South Korea's biggest export, is the biggest market, nearly double the size of the US, if you look at some of the recent figures as well. Even with North Korea, even though the rhetoric again has been heightened, and Yoon has said that a preemptive strike in the case of an impending threat is still an option. He said he will pursue a two-track approach, which is to keep communication channels with North Korea. So some experts have argued that you cannot expect too much of a difference because given the circumstances surrounding South Korea.
I mean, exactly. I mean, we've certainly seen a shift of behavior from candidate Yoon to President-elect Yoon. I mean, in the Washington Post interview that you mentioned that was published on April 14th, Yoon also vowed that his government will guarantee legal rights for both sexes in unfair and criminal circumstances, and that, quote, guaranteeing women's opportunities must also go in line with global standards. And as you mentioned before, Yoon also named a centrist former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo to lead his government. It seems that President-elect Yoon has toned down the rhetoric espoused by candidate Yoon, and his actions are intended to heal divisions instead of widen them, right? Is it possible that his comments on the campaign trail were just sensational slogans in order to rally his voters, but in reality, he's probably going to govern in a more measured manner in a bid to establish legitimacy?
Well, it is still quite too early to say, to be honest, because it is yes or no question, really. Yes, the rhetoric has clearly softened since he won the election. When he won the election, he said that he would unite this country that has been politically divided. But if you also look at some of the cabinet picks so far, there has been no shortage of controversy. And if you look at who has been his picks, it has been described by local media as Seoul-nam, which means men in their 50s graduated from Seoul National University. Some of them are from Ivy Leagues. To sum it up, his picks have been too male, too old, and too highly educated. And there has been debate on whether, these focusing too much on qualifications, is this a move in the right direction, in a sense that you've got to reflect different communities when you are politicians, and you need to have young people, you need women, you need to have people with different backgrounds, people with disabilities, gender, sexual minorities. So those still, even though the rhetoric has been softened, Yoon has questions to answer in the sense that his cabinet picks have not been diverse enough, and will that be enough to represent a more diverse South Korea in 2022.
We know that President Moon Jae-in has dedicated much of his presidency to achieving and improving inter-Korean ties and achieving inter-Korean peace. And that's something he obviously haven't quite accomplished when right now he's approaching the end of his 5-year term. And that's something is likely to be derailed by his successor, Yoon, who have called Pyongyang as Seoul's main enemy on the campaign trail. What do South Korean voters think about that? I mean, is achieving inter-Korean peace or ultimately reunification something that's on the top of their mind when they're casting their vote for Yoon?
This is an interesting point. When people look at South Korea from the outside, one of the first things that people think of is North Korea. Having a neighbor just right and sharing the border with which has been conducting missile tests. You will think that when South Koreans go to the polls, North Korea is high on their agenda. But actually, if you talk to people on the ground, people were thinking of who will make housing more affordable? Who will tackle the issue of job security? North Korea was relatively low on their agenda. So, yes, there are people out there who are excited about Yoon's heightened rhetoric against North Korea. They want someone stronger than Moon on North Korea. They want to see a South Korean president who use words like the main enemy, as Yoon has brought back. But at the same time, no one wants to see tensions rising on the Korean peninsula as well. And a lot of South Koreans want Yoon to tackle issues such as job security and the housing crisis. For Yoon to juggle between being this pro-US, someone who can stand up to North Korea, as he said, but also at the same time, he will have to tackle domestic issues. So for him to juggle between the two will be one of the biggest challenges he will be facing.
Okay. Hyunsu Yim, feature writer at the Korea Herald, thank you very much for coming on Talk the Walk to share your perspectives and your reporting with us.
Thank you for having me.
Talk the Walk will return next Saturday on HKIBC. Until next time, I'm Sarah Wong. See you then and good night.